Business Leader Roundtable event. My name is Jim McBride. I'm President and CEO of Middle Michigan Development Corporation, and I'm thrilled we had such a great turnout here today. Influential people from throughout our area facing this critical issue we're all concerned about, the issue of childcare. I want to take a moment to highlight the significance of the presence here today and to thank Build Institute for the generous support in making this event possible. MMDC applied for and received a grant through the Caring for Our Future initiative, so we can bring you this event today. Over the past year and a half, MMDC, along with our partner economic development organizations in this area, region, which includes Aranac, Bay, Clare, Wagwin, Gratiot, Isabella, Midland, Osceola, and Saginaw counties. We have been working on this Great Start Collaborative, the team behind Data-Driven Decision, and a coalition of approximately 50 people across 9 counties represented here that get a better understanding of the region's unique childcare needs and develop solutions to those needs that have been identified. We recognize this is a really golden opportunity to stand in solidarity with our employers to confront head-on the childcare crisis that's impacting our region. Childcare is not merely a convenience. It's an essential component of our workforce today. Without reliable, accessible childcare, the wheels of industry will be definitely slowed down. By ensuring childcare needs are met, we not only are nurturing our children, but we're also fostering a better environment for our workforce. Let's do a quick comparison. I think we all understand that employee turnover and absenteeism are critical factors that face our companies, right? Well, annually, Michigan, for employee turnover, costs the state about $1.04 billion. Absenteeism costs the state about $1.26 billion a year. That grand total is $2.33 billion, absenteeism and employee turnover. But childcare is $2.88 billion, is what it's costing the state. It's higher than the combined total of absenteeism and employee turnover. So to me, that really gives it perspective that we're actually, it's costing us more that we haven't addressed our childcare needs than those other two things combined. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our special guest, Representative Jerry Nyer, who's with us today. I know he's very concerned about this issue. We thank him for his leadership in the House. And also mention former Senator Tony Stamas, who's here representing the Midland Business Alliance, and is a former legislator as well. So thank you guys for being here today. So in the spirit of collaboration and innovation, let's engage in a meaningful dialogue today, sharing insights and chart a course for a brighter future where childcare is not a barrier, but a catalyst for success. Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce Ken Rubel, who is founder of Data-Driven Decisions. Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. All right, so just a little about myself. I'm Ken Roble from Data-Driven Decisions, founded it in 2020 in order to focus on bringing data science and human-centered design to social issues. So the point here is really bringing the right stakeholders to the table and then having the right data to be able to tell the story coherently with evidence. So we're here because of the East Central Michigan Childcare Coalition, the work that's going on. So what we're trying to do is really address the childcare crisis. And many of you are probably aware of it from your different positions in the community, but I've got pretty much the highlights I'm going to share. We've been meeting for a little over a year now, and we have hundreds and hundreds of slides explaining data and reports that have been done. And so what we're doing is really synthesizing lots of information to be able to frame childcare as what it is, which is a piece of infrastructure for our communities. And so our main goals are pretty human-centered. You'll see, number one, that every child has access to high-quality, safe, nurturing care that meets their family's needs and preferences. That's simple. Because when that's done, people are able to take jobs that they want. They're able to contribute more productively. Also, that childcare businesses and providers make living wages, have access to full benefits, and are supported to thrive in all communities. Because we know childcare workers are actually essential workers. Literally, we depend on them in so many ways to allow us to go to work. So we want to acknowledge that as some of our central focus. And why does early childhood matter? We touched on a few things here, talking about infrastructure, et cetera, but let's ground ourselves in some fundamentals. This is very popular data from Harvard University, their Center on the Developing Child, and it just shows you very simply the importance of the early months for different aspects of brain development. And that's why it is so critical to invest in early childhood, and the earlier the better, because as you see, a lot of brain formation occurs in those early months. And without the proper conditions, it can create long-term issues that can literally affect the productivity of communities. So if you want to have the ROI and economic angle, it's still that. But literally, it's humans needing care at that point in time. Similarly, when you talk about the finances, Pennsylvania's Social Policy Practice Institute has a classic study here looking at the Heckman curve and just looking at by age groups. So when we look at children 0 to 3 versus 4 to 5 versus school age and then post-school age, this is to represent the return on investment by age group. So when you invest dollars earlier, you have better long-term returns financially for communities, for economies. And so this is one of the principles that we just try to bring to our conversations when we talk about what programs exist, what programs are working, and how we want to invest in what's working. Another just example of this is the low to the high ranges of return on investment for early childhood. And this was in a pre-K study, but they reported in this Perry study, probably the most famous ROI study on pre-K or early childhood, $6 to $12 return on a dollar invested. And I'd like to ground us in a human story here. So talking to a childcare business owner, we did a lot of interviews speaking with people in the Great Lakes Bay region, and this was just a powerful quote. I think a lot of people go into this field thinking, I love kids and I love spending my day with kids, but they don't really realize it's a very serious profession and it's a very important profession, and we're going to cover some of the reasons. So why are we here? So let's pause for a second. The Great Lakes Bay region will not meet its goal of population and economic growth if people want to stay here and move here to have a family are not able to access the care that they need. That's a basic supply and demand. It's going to be too hard. People can't take jobs when they can't find solutions. The Great Lakes Bay region will not be able to attract or retain skilled workforce if parents do not have access to care that fits their schedule, budgets, and needs. So this is a part of the long-term solutions for our communities to reverse trends that we've been experiencing, such as depopulation and the resulting effect of losing business and economy. So now we're going to talk about a couple myths. This is a good way to help reframe some of the mindsets that are across the industries when we talk about childcare. Nobody wants to work anymore. It's a really popular concept since we've had all the stimulus and unemployment and turnover, the pandemic, rules changing, but in the big picture, this is out of context, right? When we think of it as people won't take a $17 an hour job, because let's look at some of the stories. And I'll just read the bold part here so we don't spend too much time, but child development and care subsidy. So one of the state benefits that's available for low-income families is the only reason I have childcare. I wouldn't be able to afford it and work at the same time. So people already struggle as just single adults in this state, and then when you add children on top of that, it becomes infinitely more complex. You have more burden and you also have less ability to take jobs without support. Here was another parent who they were meeting, two working parents with children, and they met with their financial planner and they were discussing their finances for the coming year. And the planner was explaining to them, based on your revenue and your income and the child care costs that you have, you need to start choosing which payments to skip. So, just people are pushed. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back in many cases, right? Another parent quote here is just, we could have a 2-income household, but due to the shortages in access to capacity in childcare, we will only be able to have one. So people can't re-enter the workforce, even if they have left it and they want to. I'm just gonna highlight one county here, Gratiot County. We're gonna look at, for the typical cost of care. You know, this is part of the burden. For one child, for a year, it's, $9,400, almost $10,000 for one child. 2 children, 3 children, you see, that's way more than buying a house. And similarly, when you see the monthly, $2,100 a month for 3 children, that's the average cost of the public data that's available for Gratiot County. So it's just a huge burden. So we did a bunch of surveys. We surveyed families, and the families that responded for the Great Lakes Bay region, 61% of the respondents, so almost 2/3, said that they spend more than what's considered affordable. 7% of your household income is considered affordable. Happens to be about what MISTA uses for affordable housing. But out of context, if we don't talk about the rest of cost of living, these equations don't really mean anything. Because we think people are getting affordable rates when the big picture, it's still can't afford to live. So, and you'll hear these stories everywhere. Families that they're having their first child, they start calling around, they start adding themselves on wait lists. Nobody has access or availability, and they can't even get a guaranteed spot by the time the child is born. It's a really difficult situation because infant care is the most difficult to access. It's also the most expensive. So very difficult disincentive for young families to have children, realistically. So we've thrown around the term desert. I'm sure everyone here has heard deserts of variety of various types, childcare desert being one of them, food deserts. And obviously it's about scarcity, right? And so this is a definition that researchers use to just describe that there are 3 children of the age group for every licensed slot that is available. So when you have that many children per licensed slot available, they deem it a desert, so a desert status. So as you can see, 3 or more, you could have 4 children, still a desert. Now looking at some of the mapping work that MSU did recently, they showed here, it's all red, you see, and red is bad desert. And so there's very little blue, and this is really ubiquitous across the state, across the regions, across the counties. And right now we're looking at a panel that describes infant toddler as the age group. So for infant toddlers, there's a lot of infants and toddlers without licensed care. Switch to a different age group, preschool, suddenly there's a lot more blue popping up. This is the age group that our state's giving a lot of attention to. And it happens to be kind of in a better position, as you see. There's just less desert. And again, you switch to school age, a lot more desert again. And I'll just remind you, this is 80% of zip codes. So this is like, 4 out of 5 zip codes in the region are a desert status here. So as you can see, the breadth of the issue is pretty wide. But the problem is, it also goes deeper, right? So what we just looked at are deserts. It's what everyone talks about as statuses and problems. But when you look at the numbers, it gets worse than 3 to 1. So I'm just going to highlight a couple things. Let's look at Gladwin County there. So you'll see it's 4th down there. You might not see it. There's all these little babies lined up there. There's like 14 babies for every licensed slot that's available. So that's a 14 to 1 ratio. That's a lot worse than the definition of the desert. So when we look at the raw data like this, we start understanding that there are priorities that we can address, more strategically. And I think that's what we're trying to talk about today is like once we frame an issue with data, we can start using it to be strategic too. That's the goal. Then big picture, we have a really long-term trend across Michigan of business closures and high turnover. So not just the staff, but the business. So this slide is summarizing a 4-year period of data. So I pulled this data from June 22nd, 2023. This was part of our earlier work last year. And 4 years prior. So all of the licensed providers that existed during that period, by the end of the period, more than half had closed their doors. They no longer were functioning businesses. That's a really high turnover for a very important essential service that is becoming scarcer and scarcer and more expensive. So what happens when demand keeps increasing and supply keeps decreasing? That's also not good. And then you see by county, there's a lot of variations, right? So some areas like Aranac has actually had very few closures, which is interesting. We should ask more questions about what's going on there. Everyone does have different regional county level approaches going on. But similarly, we know some of our larger counties are having really high turnover too. So there's just a lot to be done, and what we really have to do is organize as communities to help address these issues. So what's the reality? The reality is the cost of childcare makes it unaffordable for many who want to work to do so. Similarly, there's a huge gap between the care that is needed and the care that is available. So it's not really that people don't want to take jobs. Most people that are unemployed are trying to get jobs, but child care subsidy, if you're job seeking, that doesn't qualify you. You can't get coverage while you're trying to get a job. You have to have the job first, then you can get coverage. So we have a few catch-22s in our policies too. Myth number 2. I'm going to try to move a little faster because I think it takes a long time. But childcare is so expensive; these folks must be rolling in it, right? If we're paying $10,000 per year per child, I mean, do schools even get that much? But the reality is, it's extremely expensive to operate these businesses, as any provider will tell you. This is, a source in general. Like the industry makes profit margins like 1%. Like the best I've heard of in the field is pretty much like 4%. Here's a business owner describing that childcare staff have to come to work sick because they can't afford to take time off, because that means their families are not eating, because that's how much money they get paid. We are taking care of the world's most treasured thing, and we're getting paid nothing for it. The prevalence of poverty among early childhood workers is it's a bit disgraceful, unfortunately. This is, some dark humor from the field. The running joke is that you have to be privileged to stay home and run a childcare because your husband needs to make enough to subsidize you. And one more quote from the business owners. People literally can make more money at fast food restaurants. Like, childcare businesses don't have the revenue to outcompete fast food restaurant. And when people are scraping together like quarter raises, that $3 raise, people will give up their passion because they have to make do. They have to feed their kids, they have to pay rent. Big picture, they've been studying this, and our region 5, from 2001 to 2022, we lost 1/3 of the workforce in early childhood. It is shrinking fast. So that's 1,600 fewer educators across Region 5. Similarly, 78% of the region's workforce earns less than 15 an hour, right? We know that livable wages are more than that. So our essential workers can't afford to work in the field they want to. So the reality is there's a market failure in childcare. The tuition cost that families can barely afford leaves childcare workers unable to support themselves or family. Let's look at one more myth. And this is a very prevalent one because we don't all have children, right? Childcare isn't my problem. I don't have kids. Why is this my issue? Why should I have to pay for it? Well, there's a lot of good reasons, actually. So it was cited earlier by Jim. Michigan has a lot of issues related to childcare, and it's affecting our economies, our businesses, our municipalities, our tax base. So this was a report by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that cited Michigan is the 39th state in terms of labor force participation. 4 out of 5 states have better participation in the labor force than us from working age folks. And childcare is a big piece of this problem. So when we look at childcare as an economic cost, as Jim cited earlier, $2.88 billion per year for Michigan. So that's a financial impact that is very serious. And if we were to repair the infrastructure, the point is literally Michigan GDP goes up, and these are broken down, as Jim said, by different issues like turnover and absenteeism. And in our own conversations with families and surveys, this is what they reported as the prevalence of impacts from childcare. So 55% of the parents and families we spoke with said that they missed work or left work because of childcare issues. They also said 55% said distracted or worried at work. So we're talking about absenteeism, turnover, also productivity. If you don't feel like your children are in a safe place, you might not be on task as well. And that's going to affect the business's bottom line and maybe your teammates. People leaving a job, that's 1 in 4. Turned down a job, 1 in 4. Reduced working hours, about 1 in 4 also. And 1 in 10 lost their job due to their childcare falling through. To a certain extent, how many times can you forgive the absence if you don't know why? And we don't always have a system that really gathers the data to explain why staff are absent, why they have high turnover. And so one of the things we can do is start talking to employees through surveys, and that's the support we'd like to extend. Because when we talk to leaders in businesses and their employees, they're all agreeing that childcare is a big issue. It's affecting the ability to recruit candidates and retain employees. So this is leadership and employees agreeing on this. Similarly, childcare is negatively impacting my business. The leaders strongly agree with this, and so do the employees. We can skip this for now. So the reality is that the limited access to childcare is impacting employers' bottom lines. So if you run a business and you have staff that have children, if they don't have the perfect situation, you're likely going to experience the impact too. So what needs to happen to change this? And put simply, our coalition has focused on that the funding needs to change how we fund childcare. Parents can't pay and teachers can't afford to stay, so money's got to come from somewhere. Families cannot pay more and the providers cannot charge enough. So the money is ultimately the bottom line, but we have to figure out how to do that effectively and efficiently with our public resources too. So looking at another business quote to just get a little story. Providers are everything, right? They do childcare, but they also have to do HR. They have to operate as secretaries, communication specialists. They have to deal with an unprecedented amount of inspectors and auditors. Here's the slide demonstrating all of the different government systems that many providers have to work with. If you don't have a password manager, you can't go into childcare. So regulatory burdens need to be examined and changed because, when we look at that last slide, that is a lot to manage. One childcare business is supposed to manage all those accounts and different departments and entities that don't communicate necessarily. So a big thing we have to do is clean up our system so that that's efficient. And at the federal level, we're seeing great movement in terms of explicitly acknowledging childcare as infrastructure, and with huge bills like the CHIPS Act, Hemlock applied for that. This is explicitly setting aside money to address childcare issues. If you're going to do a municipal highway and you need to bring in tons of construction workers from out of state, guess what? They might be relocating some families for half the year. That's going to be an extra burden on your childcare. So you can literally pay for that with funding for the roads. You can pay for that with CHIPS Act funding. So there's a lot of ways to start addressing this infrastructure issue from different sectors. This is just another slide showing how important people perceive these issues in childcare. So this is from, I believe this was employers describing how important they think it is that Michigan address childcare issues, making childcare more affordable, increasing the supply, improving the quality, et cetera, supporting the workforce, and publicly funding it. So what we want to be able to do with the coalition is support employers, because employers need to not have to go to those 20 different websites to try to figure this out to help their own staff. And similarly, everyone deserves coworkers who come to work, and not worry about safety. So that's going to impact productivity. If we can actually share what we already know easily, then we might make some traction here. And one of the last examples here is this is recent stuff, March 2024. Mom's First and Boston Consulting Group, they did a study here with 5 different big employers, I apologize, including UPS, Etsy, etc. And they all had positive return on investment by investing in childcare as a benefit, because what they're really doing is supplementing the public infrastructure that their employees don't have access to. So by doing that, they ensure that their employees have what they need to show up. And so, up to 425% for every dollar invested was a return that they actually earned from that year of benefits. And I'm just closing on this. This is a tool that I'll be demonstrating. I shared this with everybody. I should do a time check. Anybody give me a thumbs up to? Yeah. All right. So everyone has a link to this. You're welcome to check it out on your own. I'm going to see if I can pop this up and probably on the others. All right, so when you go to that link, you'll see it takes you to this page, and it's sort of like a storyboard. You can go across these different maps. But this first one, just to give you a flavor, this is just showing all the different licensed providers across the region, so you can get a feel for where they are. We can also look at their total capacity. So we see for the this is from April 2024. We have 649 providers in the region with a capacity of 22,627. And the way we set this up is that you can use it, right? So these are all filters. So we can select if we only want to look at center-based care, for example. We just adjust it. And so now you can look at the numbers. And it'll also still give you updated figures on the total number of providers that would be that. Well, it's not loading right here. Anyways, we'll fine tune that, but the point is that you can use this to extract data. So when we look at an example like Gratiot County, this was one thing we were looking at in terms of some businesses that were interested in sports and looking at the childcare that's available. It's very limited, right? So when we zoomed into Alma County or the city of Alma, for example, you see there's a lot of local businesses, but in terms of what's available, it's pretty limited. And some of the important things to check on is like CDC subsidy. Is that even available? If you have low-income workers, you would need to know if there's going to be slots available for that. So you can check. We can just filter what's available. And there's no true here, unfortunately. There are no CDC subsidy slots in Alma. None. So that is an issue. Does anybody have any questions about what we're looking at in terms of this data point? So that they're meant to be interactive. You can refresh your browser. You can kind of mess up the data. You can also extract data. So let's say you lived in Alma and you wanted to be able to all these providers. You could highlight it, and you could actually extract the data when this pops up. This is a little list, and it will give you the whole data set behind the scenes. So the point is to make this a usable tool. If you have a second shift, employee group that needs access, you can filter the data and give you a warm referral to providers that actually provide it. All right, I'm gonna hand it off now. I think I've talked enough. Sure.
How quickly we can give data? There's an extension on the center, so we automatically.
Our goal is to actually keep monthly time points, so we're working on a longitudinal database that we'll share with the state. So that this data will actually have a slider at the top, so you can just select your month, and it'll be as deep of a history as we've obtained from the state, because we can backfill that, and then going forward, we're going to do monthly scrapes so that we can make this available to the whole state, and then offer versions like this where if you're in a region, you don't have to see everything else, we can focus on your region.
Question,
You get it set up.
and I believe you said it, but I think I might have missed it. What are the green circles?
Oh, yeah, sorry, that's fine.
That were there?
Yeah, so there were a few different, let's see, actually, Samantha, you could probably address this better than me. The Alma slide there.
So I worked with Ken about a week ago. We're working on opening a center in Alma and Gratiot County. We are looking to partner with employers that need childcare for their employees. And so Ken was reaching out to employers in Gratiot County through the chamber and through Casey of employers that are interested in partnering that need childcare for their employees. And so the green dots are employers.
Okay, I thought so, but I wasn't sure.
And so that was an example of using the data in a conversation with employers to just help them understand, like, what is the landscape like? Like, what is even accessible to your employees so that we can better address, problems they're experiencing.
Is there an interface with Great Start to Quality and the data that's collected there?
Yes, this is actually all sourced from Great Start to Quality, and I'm working with them to develop an API so that I can just automate the scraping, so that we'll have even a deeper database potentially. We might be able to do weekly.
Are you connecting with the data providers specifically, it's like internet calling, I can contact them, one, they didn't know about the roundtable, and two, they have 4 slots available right now for calendar, and I'm anticipating 7 in a couple weeks. So is there a spot where we're gonna be coming opening for daycare, like from there on?
That is definitely a huge demand and need in the field, but the problem is data systems are really limited, right? So when we talk about public data, that's all after the fact. And it's really outdated. It has nothing related to actual openings. So nothing in our public data tells us about wait lists, who's actually at capacity versus under capacity. That's actually unknown. So we are working on methods to address that. There's some shared services projects that offer potentially technology services that would allow that exactly. So the back end, we could do the reporting for them and attendance data and more referrals. So there's some opportunities for that, but it's really work that needs to be done.
Can I just say, because you brought up Great Start to Quality, I'm assuming that a lot of people may not know what Great Start to Quality is.
Sure.
And Great Start to Quality is a state-based organization. Any childcare provider who's licensed is required to register with Great Start to Quality. And that is a database where any childcare provider can update that information on a regular basis if they, it's not as fluent as we would want it to be. Not all childcare providers update that on a regular basis, but to find information about any childcare within your area, you can go to Great Start to Quality, find all licensed childcare providers, and all the data that you're interested in. What services do they provide? What are their hours? How many children do they provide services for? Ages of the children that they provide services or their hour, their business hours, their location. And Great Start to Quality also allows you to search for a licensed childcare provider within a certain region. So if you wanted it within 2 miles of your house or where you work, oh, it's by zip code, okay. So, but you can look, it does give you the opportunity to search for childcare providers within a specific area that is convenient for yourself as a family. I just want to say that.
Any other questions? I'm gonna hand it over to Tyler Hunt.
I'm gonna move or something to take this one. All right, there we go. Thanks for sharing that slide with all the different people we work with, Ken. Just get my blood boiling a little bit before I even get started, so thanks for that. My name's Tyler Hunty. I own and operate Hunty's Clubhouse and the Preschool Academy. We are based out of the Big Rapids area. I'll give you a little background about myself, but my goal for today is to first talk about providers and the challenges that we are facing and just hopefully give a little perspective about what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but then hopefully offer some opportunities for business leaders, economic development groups, whoever, to help with the child care situation in their specific communities. And I will be available after this if you have any questions for me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions and provide any information. And then if you're wondering, what's this MICCPC logo that's sitting in the middle of Hunty's Clubhouse and the Preschool Academy? With Ken and a few others, we've recently started a group of, an advocacy group for providers in the state of Michigan to help give them a voice at the state level and with some of the state departments. And it is exactly what I expected. The providers really are starving for a voice and starving for some feedback. So we're in the early stages with that, but you know, a lot of the things that I'm gonna share today are common across the board, whether you're in Midland County or you're in Gladwood. I mean, we're all really facing the same challenges today. So a little background on Hunty's Clubhouse, if you're wondering, Tyler, how did you get into this? Well, I grew up in an in-home daycare. And since pretty much my entire life until I was in high school, there was children all over my home. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating, my bedroom was the baby room where they had nap. And my mom was dead serious when she said, if you wake a baby up, you're putting them back to sleep. So I got a lot of outside time growing up. So I'll talk about my mom who operated that in-home center. Then you can see in 2008, she opened the first childcare center. And, you know, I'll call it the Chris model, is my mom's name, is a very common, just like how childcare operation in all over the country, where, like Ken mentioned, she is the owner, she is the HR department, she is training, she is staffing, she is billing. I mean, she did everything, right? And you can imagine, and all of that, on top of that, she had 5 of her own children. So she did that. I mean, she had the in-home center. She ran this single Morley location until 2019 when my sister joined her and they opened the second location in Big Rapids. Right around that time, so we have 5 locations, or 6 locations across 5 different regions, or counties, I guess I should say. One of them being Osceola, which is why I'm here and I got connected to Ken. So we have a pretty vast spread on things, but right after high school, I went to Central Michigan University. I know, I'm talking something there, sorry. I went to CMU, so I have a good feel of Isabella County, and then my wife is also from Bay City. And I see there's a lot there. I met a gentleman from Bay City, I met some gentlemen from Isabella County, so I'm pretty familiar with the mid-Michigan region. I've been in it my entire life. But after school, I moved down to Metro Detroit where I met my wife, where I was in a sales role and then was in a consulting role. And as the business was kind of transitioning from my mother to my sister around the 2019 timeframe, there was a lot of conversation like, hey, you know, how do we get another building? How do we hire 4 more staff? How do we do all these things? And I was working in the background with my mother and my sister on that. And then I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I'd really love to get out of the consulting role where I'm working a ton of hours and stressed out all the time. And in 2020, I had my first son. Yeah, I know. I got a consulting company daycare. Great choice. Good job, Tyler. No comment. But then in January of 2020, also a great time for that, I had my first son. And I looked at him, and he's the most important thing in my life. And my attitude completely changed around childcare. If you would have asked me a month prior to that, I would have said, hell no, I am not going to move back to Stanwood where there's no Mediterranean food and, you know, expand this business. But as soon as I had my son, you knew that there was no choice but to go back and expand this operation. So you can see, once I joined, things went quick. So we started finding different buildings to remodel and make into centers, expanding our operation in primarily rural communities. So, I mean, our average community probably has 2,000 people in it. And now we have 6 locations, 9 licenses, 165 team members, and capacity to serve up to 750 children each day. So it's grown. I mean, we definitely have more growth in our future. I believe that we provide very high quality programs. All of our centers are at least 4-star, with a couple being 5-star. So, you know, we've really taken a lot of pride in providing great services to these rural communities. Now, everybody's wondering, wow, if it's childcare doesn't seem as bad, why are more people not getting into it? Well, first, you know, kind of like I mentioned, there's a lot of Chris's out there. And my mom originally got into childcare because she loved children. She started watching kids. I went to a half-day preschool. She started watching some of my classmates. So she got into it because she loved the children, and she expanded out of capacity. Or excuse me, she expanded out of love for and knowing the community needed more capacity. Now, I don't want to throw her under the bus or anything, but my mom was not a good business owner. And a lot of childcare providers don't have any business backing. So she didn't know how to manage people when there was scuffles, right, amongst the teachers. She didn't know how to manage her finances. She didn't know how to do any financial planning for capital improvements. And I watched her struggle my entire life. And that's the state that a lot of these childcare providers are in. In fact, on the previous slide, last year we acquired an operator who had 2 centers in Nuevo County. And it was almost like I was talking to my mom. She's like, I can't deal with it anymore. I can't deal with the state. I can't deal with the parents. I can't deal with the staff. And the financials just don't make sense. Like I'm just going to give up. So that's, as Ken shared, half the people have closed in the last 4 years. That's one of the biggest reasons why. They don't have the support that they need to operate their businesses. And the biggest issue with that is staffing. They'll just like anybody who owns a business in here, we're all saying the same thing. It's tough to get good people and it's tough to keep them. But in childcare, we're not making widgets. We're caring for the next generation. And at Huntley's Clubhouse, we've built our business very intentionally to support at scale, where we have a hiring process and an orientation and a training and all these things to ensure that when our team members, our teachers step into that classroom, they are capable, they're educated, and they know what's expected of them. That is not the case for many childcare providers. A teacher gets mad that you didn't give them a day off, they said, all right, I'm out. Now you have an open spot that you need to fill immediately. They don't have a bench to support them. So they bring someone in and the parents are saying, who's this? And the kids are not covered. I mean, it's a whole situation, right? The average turnover in childcare across the nation is 48%. Half of the teachers are leaving every single year. How do you manage that? There is no answer, but I can assure you that most childcare providers do not have the resources to effectively train and retain their team members. I had an opportunity through the Michigan Childcare Provider Collective to speak in front of a joint labor committee of the House and the Senate. And I'll tell you the brief story that I told there because I didn't have much time. My son attends our Morley Center. So I have 2 boys, 3 years old and 9 months old. I consider it a blessing that I have children in my own care because it really helps provide clarity when we're making decisions around our programming. But it also brings a lot of reality to the challenges that we face. He had his favorite teacher came up and said, hey, she's a single mother, 2 children. I need a $4 raise. And I said, well, Casey, I can't do that because it's outside of the pay scale. She's like, well, I got another job offer for $4 more. I love my job. I want to stay, but I seriously need to make more money. Just given the constraints that we have, which I'm not going to get into, I wasn't able to do it. So she left and went to work at a gas station when she was an incredible teacher. And I had to listen to my son cry on the way to school every day, asking where Miss Casey was because we couldn't give her a $4 raise. It's disgusting. Fantastic teacher. So there's a lot of challenges around the staffing side of things. The next is tuition. Ken mentioned parents can't afford to pay, teachers can't afford to stay. Well, I just talked about the teachers can't afford to stay side. In the communities that we serve, the majority of tuition paying parents fall within the ALICE threshold, which is a new thing to me, so I'll explain it if you don't know what that means. People who live within the ALICE income threshold are just above qualifying for any state subsidies. So they're paying for everything out of pocket, but just barely. That's the majority of the families we serve. When I make a tuition raise on those families, it helps me this much and it hurts them this much. So you sit there, and a lot of the people that I'm serving in these families and these communities are friends, people I used to play sports against in high school, so which makes it very challenging to raise tuition. In rural communities, Midland's not going to really fall into this, but in rural communities, you're not going to get any providers of scale. You're not going to see a Goddard School, you're not going to see Apple Tree, you're not going to see any learning care group brands because the economics don't make sense. Like Ken mentioned, the average childcare provider is making low single-digit returns if they're lucky. Those people are looking for, 20% margin. They're venture capital backed. That's what they want. You will never get one of them into your communities. So it's up to you as economic development, as businesses to support these childcare operations so that they can open up and then provide stabilized tuition. And to tie that back in the communities they go into, they can raise tuition as many times as they want. Learning Care Group in Metro Detroit, I have a friend who attends one of their centers, raised it 3 times last year and had like a activity fee of $150 they charged. If I did that, I wouldn't be here right now. The communities would lose their minds. So in our rural communities, we're very limited on how much we can charge the families. Regulation from the state, as it should be, is heavy-handed. We're caring for children. We have a new State Department. When any parent can call in on a child care provider for anything they want, and the state will investigate. A lot of child care providers are getting out of the industry just because of how the state is treating them during these investigations. It seems like there's a guilty until proven innocent mindset. If you don't have an exact explanation for something that happened, then you're guilty, not the parent or anybody else. So it's very exhausting for the providers to deal with this. And, we're blessed where we have a bunch of directors and a big team where if they need to blow off some steam and have a conversation, there's peers to do it with. Most providers don't have that. So they internalize it and take it home and get stressed out, and eventually they just give up. And then finally, as we all know, we've all been to the grocery store and seen our bills go up. Costs are increasing all around us, which is just compressing it more. Can't charge the parents more money. Hopefully the state comes in and supports us. Last year they decreased subsidy rates by 26%, which hurt a lot. But you're having rising costs. Staff want to get paid more money and parents can't afford to pay. So you really just push the providers in a real pinch as they're trying to provide care for these children. Oh, and you'll definitely see, as Ken mentioned, the biggest thing this region is going to need is infant and toddler care, and that's across the board. And that's going to continue happening, especially with the state's investment into preschool. There's going to be a lot of people focusing on providing 4-year-old care, so that's not going to be a problem. But what you will see is infant and toddler care drop off the face of the earth because it's just going to be more challenging and there's going to be less money involved in it.
Tyler?
Yes.
Can you maybe address just really briefly about infant toddler care and how that impacts the cost of childcare? And also how childcare just in general, what are those, why is childcare so expensive? Why can't you just raise your, when it's expensive, how come you cannot increase your costs?
So increasing tuition, parents just can't really pay for it, right? I mean, it's kind of like a judgment call. I don't want to put more financial pressure on my parents. So that's why we're also formed a group to advocate really hard at the state level to tell these stories so that they will come and support us. And quite frankly, right now, we're getting some support, which is an absolute blessing. Things are looking like they might, be improving. But infant and toddler care, why do we see such an issue there? Because the ratios are low. So until a child in the state of Michigan is 2.5 years old, there's 4 children for every 1 teacher, and that's mandated by the state. In other states, typically when they turn 1, that goes to 1 to 5 or 1 to 6. Why is the state of Michigan so strict on it? Great question. But we're pushing back, hopefully, to make that to ease that burden a little bit. But quite frankly, you still make money, right? Especially in rural communities where you're charging $800 a month, like we're paying 3 teachers full-time to be in that classroom, the numbers just don't work. And from our specific business model, we cannot make money on the children until they're 3 years old. So the game we're playing is providing a high quality service so that they stick with us, so that when they turn 3 and 4 years old, then we see the long-term benefit of that. And we have great retention, but yeah, infant and toddlers is just not lucrative. If you see somebody open just an infant and toddler center, it's probably a nonprofit or something, probably a negative profit. I don't know. There's no way that we could possibly ever make it work at the scale that we have. So, now that was negative, got everybody bummed out. Let's talk about ways that there's opportunity for your communities to access more high quality childcare. First is community investment. I mentioned that acquisition we had. I went in and had a conversation with the Fremont Foundation about a very tired building that we got during that, and they gave us a low interest loan to remodel it. There's money out there, right? And you as business leaders or economic developers, whatever it may be, you know people and you know how to access that. So supporting your providers when you're in dire need to find different ways to access capital will be huge. Childcare, once the capital costs are put into the business, it operates pretty smoothly. I guess, well, the cash flow is pretty smooth, right? Parents don't want to lose their spot, so they're going to pay their bills. The state has yet to miss a payment. So once it's up and running and you hit 80 to 85% capacity, it sustains. But it doesn't make enough money. If you're making low single-digit dollars, you're not building up capital fast enough to go and put $100,000 or more down on a new facility. So helping these childcare providers or these organizations with that upfront cost will be a huge benefit to getting something in your community. Business partnerships, a lot of the big providers are really pushing these right now. So there's opportunities for businesses, call up a new center or call up an existing one and pay for the slots. Pay for the slots for your employees. This is way more common than it might seem. And if someone drops out, then you have a slot available for the next person. So them knowing that they have childcare available is a huge benefit to the employers. Shared services, I talked about the Chris model, right? She's doing all this administrative tasks. Where we are now with Hunty's Clubhouse, we built ourselves very intentionally where we have internal IT, internal HR, we have our own enrollment specialist, we have an office manager, we have a marketing department. Like we have, I think, 8 or 9 people who sit in our corporate office to support those centers and those locations. The Chris people don't. They don't have that to support them. And there's a group out of, what is it, Ken? Tawas? There's a group right now who's working to put together a shared services model for their childcare providers in their region, where they have access to people who can provide them knowledge around business, or quite frankly, to the hiring forum, manage the enrollment process, answer the phones, do these different things. We built it out of necessity. But we have more resources, right? We were able to take a little bit bigger picture, look at things, and make these investments. Small providers don't. So communities can provide the support of these shared services to these providers, or work on spinning them up, getting the providers together to invest in different software, I don't know. But there's definitely ways that they can be provided with some resources to help them run more efficiently. TriShare is a new program by the state, well, not new, a couple years old. And take this with a grain of salt. I am okay with TriShare. I don't love it, but it's a pretty good idea and concept. And I think it's available in Region 5, but I'm not 100% sure. So TriShare, 3 things. The employers pay a portion of the childcare, the parents pay a portion of the childcare, and the state pays a portion of the childcare. Great idea. It's a very early concept, but if it's offered in your region, if you're an employer, I would strongly suggest to look into it. Because it's an opportunity for you to have a benefit for your employees and for them to have access to quality education. And from the provider side, it lowers our risk because, well, 2 of the people who are paying us aren't the parents. And as you can imagine, sometimes there's some issues with collections. And then finally, Ken mentioned the subsidy payments. Well, they're the state's now calling them scholarships, so that's why you might see that word. A lot of people, as he showed that night, qualify for scholarships, but they don't even know it. So when you hire them on and you're like, oh, okay, you might be a little more of a low income person, immediately have them apply for a CDC scholarship. Because if they know right on the spot that they can get access to high quality childcare for free, well, that's a huge benefit right there, and you as an employer help them gain access to it. So here's just a few opportunities that I've come across that have really helped businesses in different communities with adding childcare. So I don't really have anything else. I kind of figured there'd be a few questions for me. Like I said, I'll also be hanging around after. If you want to send me an email with any questions after this, I'd be happy to answer. But I wanted to leave a little time here at the end to answer any questions that may be out there. Yes?
I'm just wondering if it would be beneficial for employers and maybe there are more grants out there to fund a county or a couple of county clearinghouse where an employee could go and find out where the open slots are and if they qualify for any scholarships or all of the childcare questions could be answered in one place.
Yeah, I think that, like scholarship qualification and things like that are very manageable. The challenge you're gonna have with knowing available slots is just reporting from providers. We have a CRM, so I can tell you at any minute kind of where we stand, but I don't know if most providers are gonna be going in every week and updating, well, this person left, and if they do have an open slot, they probably have someone on their wait list. So I think that's a very good idea in concept, but there definitely could be a resource center for parents who are looking for childcare to come in and talk with somebody who's knowledgeable in the space. Hey, here's the different centers. Here's center-based. Here's home-based. Here's, a religious-based program. Here's all these different things. Because right now, parents are just Googling or going to the Great Starts Equality website. I mean, there's not a ton of information or resources out there for them as they're on the hunt for childcare. So I do think that's a great idea. Yes?
We already have something that's kind of like that, post worker. And in that, when we have something that's gonna help a person, they have, post workers where you can sign up. And they'll help you reach the resources that you need, including if you need daycare, because it's a social determinant of health. They'll help them look for those things. So they're like a navigator. So
Do the employers know that and send their employees there?
that's a good question, because it's a resource through the health department, in the Shire. But it's free, because it's already public funds, so it's public outlet, maybe. But they can go and they can apply, self-refer themselves to the health department, and then they can get that help, that resource, and fill out those documents.
Oh, so they're just right through the health department.
This is the health department.
Interesting. Yes, ma'am.
I would tell us, we were talking about bias and it's
Yes.
working for the MSO. Also, because it's not a one size fits all, we know that what might work for one employer in community might not work for the other. So a lot of resources. So one of our largest employers is Credit Air, and we mentioned scholarships. Childcare Network, I met with them when we had the East Lansing ECICU. And they're very unique. I don't believe any other facility does this. But they offer scholarships that the employer can do. And they're 100% tax deductible as well as 100% customizable. So you might say, I have X amount of people making X amount of dollars. They might qualify for some of the grants. They see their eligibility, and then we'll cover so much in the scholarship. And then you can, customize it again as much as you want. That mixed in with any flex dependent credit you might offer through your company. Again, you might be able to match fundings with that, or at least allow them to bank some money that is pre-tax dollars. So there's a lot of things out there that you can utilize to help going forward. And I know one of the barriers that we have is the stigma of giving to employees that have children, and then the individual is feeling ousted and not being getting a benefit because we don't have children or my children are grown. So again, to that flex spending, if you give X amount of dollars, you can give lump sums to them as well that they utilize towards medical or childcare. So it kind of takes that stigma away, as well as the scholarships, because they're just saying, I'm just recommending you to go to this 501c3 to get a scholarship.
Yeah, just apply. And if you don't qualify,
Yep.
no
Yep.
problem. But if you do, it's a huge benefit.
Yep.
Samantha?
You talked about the high ratios. Can you, for this room, talk about how childcare providers, what our labor percentage is, how much our cost is compared to all the businesses?
Yeah, so roughly, the industry average for cost of labor for an operation is around 70 to 80%. So your biggest cost is in labor, right? You're required to have a certain number of teachers in a classroom with children. It's challenging sometimes to be efficient with those ratios and transitioning rooms. So there's a heavy labor cost in the industry.
And that's why it costs.
Right, and that's exactly why it costs so much. Yes.
The other thing I was just gonna add, because a lot of people don't know this, you would obviously, but we have very specific square footages that we have to maintain for the number of children. Because I've talked to business leaders, that have asked me why I can't put more than 8 children in this room. And it's because that's mandated as well.
Yeah, there's a ton of requirements for opening a childcare center, and if anybody's like in the early stages of doing that or looking at it, I'd be happy to take a moment to kind of like, I mean, write down my information and send me an email, and then set up an hour call to kind of talk you through like what are some of those pitfalls you're gonna need to avoid early on because they can be challenging. How am I doing on time? Am I done? I'm done. But if you have any more, I probably went over, I'm sorry, Kathy. But if anybody does have any questions, I'm gonna stick around for a while after, and I'd be happy to have a conversation. So thanks for your time, everybody. Next is Kathy, right?
Hi, everyone. Can I get a shout out from all my friends over 50 who have multiple pair of glasses and you're trying to figure out which one you should wear? And they'll end up on my head anyway, the headbands. So, hi everyone, I am Kathy Zenda-Wilson. I'm co-director of Pulse at the WEF John Institute. We are an early childhood system building organization in Southwest Michigan. Thank you very much. And I'm joined here by my co-director, Maria Ortiz-Ford, who's over in the corner. Thanks, Maria. Just by way of, why am I here? We're from Southwest Michigan. We are actually partnering with all of the regions across the state in these kind of events. We started in 2022 engaging our business leaders in Southwest Michigan through things we called our CEO roundtables. We wanted to really help our business leaders understand not just that they had a role to play in helping us address this crisis, but help them understand what they could do specifically. Because our first event, which was great, we had a great turnout. We had it at Bell's Brewery, for those of you who are beer fans, that will bring people out for sure. But what we learned is that they were really hungry to know what to do. They understood the context of the problem, they were experiencing it, so they were really anxious to do something. What we lacked on the childcare side was knowing what specifically to ask them to do. So we got to work at that time and said, you know what, we are going to actually build something for them. The U.S. Chamber Foundation at the same time had created a roadmap for employers that was pretty one-dimensional. It had a lot of recommendations in it. But I got on the phone and called them and said, I love your tool, but we need more, and it needs to be deeper. It needs to be really applicable for our employers. Do we have your permission to use this as a foundation for what we want to build? And they said, absolutely, go ahead. So we got to work, build the employer roadmap, which you have the booklet in front of you at your tables right here. And we really started, we re-engaged our business leaders and said, we need to know, is this going to be something that works for you? This is where we are, we're here. So this is the site itself when you get to it. I'm going to tell you briefly what you find when you visit the site, but most of it is summarized in the book, and I want to really get to you understanding what those different strategies are so that you can start talking about what might work for you. We've heard a lot from Ken and from Tyler about a lot of the efforts that are underway in the state to address what we call a wicked problem. So in systems thinking, you call it a wicked problem because it requires multiple strategies to fix. There are no silver bullets that are going to fix this problem, right? As you've heard multiple times, families can't afford to pay, teachers can't afford to stay, so we've got a workforce issue in childcare that is going to require all of us to try and contribute to try and fix. And Tyler, we've heard the number up to 83% of labor costs for childcare businesses. So it is, it's significant. So imagine yourself running a business on 17% to pay for everything else outside of labor. And that's with the labor market that's making, oh wow, did I get really loud just then? So the labor market that is actually being paid poverty wages. So this is not ideal for anybody. Nobody's really winning in this space right now. And so we want to talk about how we landed at this roadmap, what we've learned from our employers that we call our childcare champions in Southwest Michigan, in hopes that it might inspire or motivate some of you to think about what you could do specifically as employers. Because all the other stuff is important to you for context, but there's not much you can do about state regulations, you think, but there may be. So we're going to get to that as well. All right, so when you visit the employer roadmap and you're saying, all right, I'm ready. I'm going to get my folks on board. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this issue. We are going to strongly encourage that you start from a place of knowledge and that you survey your staff to understand what the needs are specifically. When you're on the site, you will find many different links to the same survey that can be completely customizable. It's available in Word and PDF. We recommend that you actually use something like a Survey Monkey so that you can collect the data digitally so that it's easier to analyze. But what it will do is help you understand what are the specific issues that my workforce is experiencing. Is it the lack of accessibility that the children that they have at a certain age you can't find the care? Is it that they can't find care that aligns with what their needs are? So if many of you have, second and third shift workers or weekend workers, those are different issues. And if you dig into Ken's maps, you'll see an even starker picture be able to form around weekend and overnight care, right? So this is why we want to make sure that we're encouraging folks to understand, especially employers, that this is not a one-size-fits-all, that you want to create a strong and healthy ecosystem for childcare in your region, because you want to make sure that families have choice. You want to make sure that when families with young children are deciding where to send their kids, you're not saying, here's your only option, right? I want you to go to only this thing. Because it's not going to work for everyone. My kids are really old now. My youngest is 25 next week. But when he was born sick. And my daughter, who was 5 years older than he was already in a center. But I was not about to send my sick kid to a center where I was a little concerned about him getting the one-on-one care he was going to need, right? Because he had to have medicine every 4 hours. I needed to be able to work knowing that he was going to be cared for. So I had to make that decision that was deeply personal on my own. So you don't want to take that away from folks. So that's why we encourage you, really understand what your workforce is experiencing and then see what resources you have available, what kind of risk you're willing to take to invest in your folks. It's interesting because our first group of employers that decided they were going to do their surveys thought that they needed some cover. They thought, we don't want to ask our workforce about childcare because then they're going to assume we're going to do something about it. And we're not sure we are yet, right? There's some risk there. So our economic developer stepped in and said, what if we conduct the surveys for you? We'll come in, we'll say that we're doing this community-wide assessment of what the needs are. Your contribution will help us greatly understand this. And what they found when they got the data back and talked to their workforce is that the cover wasn't really necessary. Because nobody was expecting them to do something. They hoped, but that wasn't the expectation. So armed with that data, they were really able to really understand, for one in particular, it was that it was unaffordable. It wasn't necessarily about accessibility. So they created something they called the lifestyle benefits. I'm going to get to those a little bit later, that addressed, even the way what they named them was intentional. So that's if you have an elderly parent you're caring for, you can use these dollars for that. So it's not just childcare. If you want to just contribute additional PTO days, you are allowed to use the dollars for that. If you wanted to do it just for backup care, so they provided a set of options for folks so that it wasn't just a one size fits all. It was really about, I want to make sure I'm being responsive to what I see the needs are. So when you visit the site, you'll see this page. It says that, all of you have a role to play. We want to make sure that you know what to do. And then when you get to each of the opportunities that are on there, which I'm going to go into a little bit more, and you'll see them all in the book, you're going to make sure every single one of the pages is going to say, make sure that you understand the issue, do your survey. I know that it feels like a heavy lift, but if I were, when I go into a room and ask employers whether or not they have a really good sense of what the childcare needs are of their staff, they're guessing. There's a lot of assumptions made, and there isn't necessarily a really grounded sense, because most people in C-suite aren't dealing with childcare issues themselves. So it feels very distant. We had one employer say to us, well, I assumed it was only, especially after they saw their data, I thought the challenge was only with people who are coming to work for us, like they couldn't get the childcare they needed to come. If they're at work, I figured they had figured it out, right? Like that was my assumption. And they had almost 60% of their staff say that they weren't happy with their current childcare arrangements. So they were there, like they found care, they patched it together in some way, but it wasn't ideal. So really, having said, I had another CEO say, and we had to really keep a poker face with this one, I only have men on staff, so I don't have a childcare issue. right? I mean, you gotta laugh because you're gonna cry otherwise. Like, men have children. This is not. I know that we as women carry a lot of the burden, but we all have the responsibility, right? So this is not just a woman issue. This is a human issue that we need to address in that way. So what does it look like? Well, the opportunities that we were able to align with what the U.S. Chamber Foundation had created, and then add a little to, was making sure that we're actually supporting our families. And this is holistic. It's like you looking at your leave policies and making sure that they align with what's best practice, right? If you talk to people who are new families, do they understand your leave policies and how to navigate those? Are you putting things in place so that they can actually benefit? And not just them, because if you think about powerful leave policies that are really comprehensive, do multiple things. Tyler talked about the cost of infant care. You're reducing the burden on the system itself when babies can be home longer with their families. You're also helping the child develop, because in that space of attachment, for those of you who understand child development, serve and return is really critically important those first 6 months. If they can be with their parents and be with somebody one-on-one, it is ideal, right? It doesn't work for everyone, but the longer you can extend leave, the better. And it's also that you're gonna have a retention issue. We know that companies with great leave policies retain employees because it's something people look for, especially young people who are gonna be having children. So it's important for a multitude of reasons to be looking at your leave policy. When we think about childcare, we're not always thinking about that, but it does tie to it very, very tightly. Flexible scheduling, this doesn't work for everybody, right? But where it does, it can be really powerful. If you can help people do job shares in places that might work, if there are people trying to figure out what it looks like. So we have tools on the site that tell you, what does flexible scheduling look like and how do I do it? And you'll find tools on the site to actually do that. You'll also find case studies where available, so you can see how did another employer do this. So when I talk about flexible scheduling, we have an employer, it's a small manufacturer in Battle Creek, who knew they didn't have money to invest in childcare, but when he did a survey of his employees, found that the majority of his employees were young women, young single mothers with school-age children, and that they were late often. They missed a lot of work. And he realized that he was starting his shift. It was a one-shift operation. He was starting his shift before school started. And before school care is really hard to find. So he adjusted his schedule to match school schedules. Now that reduced his manufacturing time, but it decreased his folks leaving. So he was able to maintain the same workforce for a really long time because he was able to match those hours. Again, not everybody can do that, but it's on there as an example, right? Like, these are things you could do, really get folks together and talk about what the solutions are once you know what the data is. Backup care is something that is really hard to find and really critically important. So how many of you have children? Okay. How many of you have played the whose job is most important in the morning game with your partner or spouse? Right? Like, you get up and a kid didn't sleep that night, you're like, clearly they're sick, they can't go to childcare. Who gets to stay home? I am married to, he was a teacher, he's now retired. And we did it all the time. He's like, I can't get a sub. I'm like, I have 8 meetings, I can't reschedule those. So it was this constant, like, and all the stress that brings on to families with young children is really hard. Having some form of backup care when that happens, not necessarily when they're sick, that's not the greatest example, but if your childcare provider gets sick, where are you gonna go if you use home-based care? If they go on vacation or they close for some reason, where are you gonna go? So having some sort of backup care is really critically important. And then this idea, we've talked about these voucher subsidies, which we're calling scholarships now, and dependent care. There are ways that you can financially support your team members. It is, quite honestly, the easiest lift and the most impactful, because you're retaining family decision on where they want to send their children, because then they would have the resources to address the affordability issue, because it is really expensive. On-site care is the Taj Mahal. Not for everybody, but those who have done it highly subsidize it, and it takes a really long time to build. You still have the same challenges you would in another childcare business in finding staff, But it is something that can greatly be an incredible attractor for people who are looking for jobs. CalSec in Kalamazoo has one, Whirlpool has one, vastly different models. But they tend to think that it's what works for them. At CalSec, anybody here know the company CalSec in Kalamazoo? They're a spice company. So they're science-based and they attract scientists from all over the world. And what they say about their childcare center is that it's not childcare, they're building future scientists. So all of their play is science-based, they're very intentional about what they do. And that was started as a family-owned business, and one of their board members is a family member that started the company. And she herself couldn't find childcare for her board meetings. And she said, if I'm dealing with this and I have resources, I can't imagine what our staff is dealing with. And they have a campus in Kalamazoo, so they had the space to do it, but it took them a good 5-6 years to get up and off the ground running. So great Patagonia is a model to look at as well. If you're really interested and you're really like, nope, we want to have it on site. It does take away some of the choice issue. And it's also, you're not gonna have enough slots for everybody. So then your decision making about who gets a slot there and who doesn't is something you have to weigh out. But very powerful approach. And then when I talked about you not having a role in helping us with these regulation issues that Tyler talked about and Ken also lifted up, that's not true. There are things that you can do as advocates that are really important. I'm gonna go to a page down here, go a little out of order. Here are our 3 initial childcare champions, and you'll see Cheryl Johnson is the chief people officer from Bronson Healthcare. Andy Richards is COO from Duncan Aviation, and you've got Massimo Rivera, who is the lead director for Magna in Battle Creek. And they came together and said, we'd love to advocate for what changes are needed in the state, because they started understanding through our engagement all of the challenges that our childcare businesses were facing. And so they wrote a letter to our legislators that got published in Crane's Detroit that really said, as business leaders, state, we need you to get on board with looking at your regulations and how you're funding this childcare, because we need more. This is critical infrastructure. We can't operate our businesses here without it, and it's important. So what we'll have on this site, especially moving forward, because we're putting together an advocacy toolkit, are things that you can engage in around advocacy, because those of you who are business owners sit at tables we do not sit at. You have voices that carry farther than many of ours. It is a real challenge for many of us. That's why I'm so grateful for the group that you've put together, Tyler, to really elevate those voices. This is a very unstructured group of professionals, and they don't have a lobby. Nobody's at the state or federal level really saying childcare needs this. So we need all of us to say, this is critical infrastructure. We need to view it as such and fund it as such. We need to reduce the barriers to these poor folks who are doing this work. And, we talk about often that childcare is operating from a broken model. The market is not going to fix this. There is no way for that to happen. So we have to be thinking very critically about how we're going to invest public dollars to maintain and sustain the sector. And I know that scares a lot of folks, but we have money to do a lot of things in this country. And this one, we know from all of the return on investment data, all of the studies that have been done, that this is one place we will not regret investing. Because what's the Frederick Douglass saying? It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Right? We will pay for this eventually if we don't invest when they're young. So the more of us advocating for that, the better. So again, just listing some of our champions in Southwest Michigan. I grew up in Southeast Michigan, that was a little slip of the tongue. I shared that here. So what are they looking at? Somebody had mentioned how when somebody calls into work, we're not really gathering data about whether or not it's childcare related. Magna came to that same conclusion when they looked at their data and said, we're going to set up a special call-in system. So if you call into Magna and you say, I can't show up at work today, they ask you if it's childcare related. If it is, you're redirected to somebody else whose job it is to take details. Like, did your backup care fall through? Did your childcare worker get sick? Is your kid sick? Like, what specifically is it? Because when they invest, they want it to meet the actual needs of their staff. So they're going a little bit deeper with their data collection, and that's what they're doing there. Kellanova, which is also, it's 2 different companies now, for those of you who follow that. the WB Cohen Company, are going to be launching their survey yet this year. Duncan Aviation has probably done the most, and actually Tyler and I were on the same panel, providing testimony in Lansing in March, and Andy Richards from, Duncan sat on that panel with us and told our legislators that this is a labor crisis. We need to address this, holistically and comprehensively. But they've also done so many things. They invited our group in for a lunch and learn with their staff to help their staff understand, how do I access childcare? Like, what is even available for me locally? And also to start exploring like some of their development questions. We brought some of our child development experts in the room with us so they could ask questions. Like, they really want to be a comprehensive support to their workforce. They're like, we want to make sure that you have what you need to be a great parent, because we know you're going to be a great employee if we invest in you in that way. So they've done a lot of things that are great. Bronson is looking at on-site care. They are one of the largest investors in TriShare in the state. So again, TriShare is a beautiful idea and concept. There are some things we need to work out, but this idea of being able to have multiple people contribute to the cost is great, but it's not for everybody. In order to be eligible, you have to be at a certain income threshold. So like Duncan was really interested in TriShare, but had so few employees that qualified, which is a good problem to have. That means they're paying their staff well, but they're still gonna have those folks on the bubble. They can't really afford to pay it, but don't qualify for this. So it's great, but there are some things we need to work out. I want to just share that the city of Kalamazoo loves the idea of TriShare. This is the city proper, so that the organization that runs the city. And they said, we've got people in some very poor neighborhoods that we've been working with very directly that we think could benefit from a TriShare, but they don't have an employer that participates. So they are playing the role of the employer. So that third of the employer, the city of Kalamazoo allocated resources for. So if you think about your municipal partners and some of the things they can do, there's some ways to get pretty creative about supporting people. So they're helping people who are working at the gas station in the neighborhood that may not have an employer that participates, but they know can't afford childcare. So they're helping in that way. So this is what can happen when you get yourselves together and you start to problem solve around this wicked problem, is that there are solutions. And we want to really look at those incremental solutions that lead to actual systemic change. Okay, so what you have in front of you, and I shared earlier, is what we call our employer roadmap. We're not stopping there. We know that our economic developers, do we have any economic developers in the room? Okay, a lot of them. All right. So we're developing an economic development roadmap. Our planning process, so much like the group that is here, we work closely with our economic developers. We're also the planner for Region 8. So we're developing our own comprehensive plan. And through that process, learned, much like our employers, economic developers are not resistant to helping out in this childcare space. They're not necessarily sure what to do. And so we did a lot of research. And by research, I say I spent an entire weekend reading somebody's 178-page thesis for MIT about what economic developers can do in the childcare space. I have to write that person a letter if somebody actually read her thesis, because I know anybody else had. Because there was nothing out there, folks, nothing. So I created an assessment for economic developers to use to say, here are your options of things that you can do. And in our region, we had our economic developers respond in 3 different ways. You already do this and that's great. We consider it, but we need some support, or this is out of our lane. We just don't see this as our thing. And so we're supporting our economic developers in our region to really look at that through that lens and say, yeah, this is what we're going to be doing, because they play a critical role in business development and childcare businesses. Well, we need to let them, Tyler's the exception, really operating as a business. Chris was not. I don't think she would categorize herself as a business owner, right? Yeah. And so there's a lot of work we have to do on that end of things to try and really improve their confidence to say, I'm worthy of these business supports and I qualify. And then we've got to work on the side of the economic developers and our small business developers to help them get prepared to actually support those folks. So those roadmaps are going to be coming online this year. Look for those. We have one for municipalities as well, working on one around policy. And they'll all be available at the pulseroadmap.org. So visit often and stay for a long time. So now we talked to you a long time and you ate and now you're probably tired, but it's my opportunity to eat because the food is gone. But that's all right. I am going to now have you, engage in some dialogue, all right? So, we have, this Mentimeter we're gonna pull up. I need everybody to get their phones out. How often are you asked that? And I want you to take a picture of this QR code. It's going to pull up a survey for you. And as you're looking at the questions that are on the survey, what I want you to do is talk about them with folks at your table. Really just talk through your responses, and then you're gonna plug them in once you've had a moment to talk about them. And then we're gonna see what your responses are. Because the questions we're gonna ask you are going to be, what are your thoughts about what you just heard? Right, so just general, like, I'm really concerned about this. Oh my gosh, I'm kind of excited. Holy cow, I didn't know things were so bad. All right, so whatever it is. And then given your influence and power, what role do you feel you're best positioned to play to support the collective early learning and care ecosystem building? I know that's a lot, that was a mouthful, right? But I hope that what we've demonstrated is this is not a one-off thing. There is no silver bullet that's gonna fix this. We have to look at a comprehensive ecosystem approach that is really about building the climate that's gonna work for childcare to thrive and for your workforce to thrive. And then number 3, what actions are you best positioned to take immediately as an employer, if that's your role? And what support would you need to do this? And then if there's anything more you need to know, you'll have an opportunity to write that in there, and we'll capture this information. So did anybody have any questions about getting into Mentimeter? And if you don't have a smartphone with you, you can just participate in the conversation. And then we'll come back and look at what your responses were. So we have about 5 minutes to do this. I think it's already 1:45. So, so we're gonna switch over to the Mentimeter now and just talk amongst yourselves. So this next one is giving your influence and power, what role do you wanna play? So there's a lot of folks who, said that they would like to engage further. I see a lot of stuff around economic development. Again, check the Pulse roadmap. You'll have some resources there soon. Being a convener, and then advocating. So again, get yourself engaged, get yourself knowledgeable enough that you can speak to this. When all of us are talking about childcare, it's interesting because one of the employers in our region said to me, I think that we have to talk about this as a workforce issue first. It gets more people at the table. If that's what you need to do, I don't care how we talk about it, but think about, if some of the limitations that you might be experiencing is that there are people who just don't see themselves as this, they don't see it as their issue. So they're not gonna come to the table, they're not going to engage. But if you talk about this being a workforce issue, that's gonna get everybody's attention, right? I think there's a group actually in Hillsdale County who called their event with their business leaders, Workforce and Wine. They did it in the evening, and it got some folks out. Not as many as they would like, but it did work for a certain segment of the population. So let's make sure that that you acknowledge that you do have power and you've got influence, and think about how you can use that in a way that's going to support the overall goal of moving them into some systemic change. Oh, you're doing it. So I think I'm doing it, it's Zach's doing it. So what support would you need? I hear this a lot, that you have to find out who internally needs to be on board. And there's an acronym out there called ADKAR. Anybody ever hear of ADKAR? It's how change happens. So ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, application, and my God, reinforcement. I knew what the R was, it was not coming to me. When you're bringing people along, make sure that they are aware of what the issue is so that you can build a desire to actually want to make change. Too often we just come in with the knowledge, come in with a bunch of data, we say this is why you should care. That doesn't work. It is really about helping them understand context, sharing stories, because stories are really powerful, and then getting them on board to actually create some change with you. So internally, if you've got to build some stakeholders internally, you need partners and champions. Be thinking about what stories you can tell. Lifting them up from your workforce is a really powerful way to do that, really understanding what those needs are. Funding is always going to be an issue, and this is why we need more advocating. We need more public dollars in this space so that we can actually start working on systemic changes that are going to work. When Tyler talked about the decrease in the scholarship rates last year, that hurts a lot of people, right? To folks who aren't in that system or don't have to rely on those benefits. it's easy to lose sight of that. But it's the difference between somebody saying, I really want to work, but I can't afford childcare, right? It's just not gonna work for me, and the subsidy's not enough to cover what the cost of care is. So if you want people to work, if you want people to actually be able to engage, you're gonna have to look at all of those things and be able to see, like from a systems perspective, how all of it is connected, right? So we can do that, then we're better positioned. Somebody had mentioned municipalities in a couple of these, and the municipal roadmap is gonna be really helpful for folks, because there are a lot of barriers municipalities put in the way of business development when it comes to childcare. And so there's a lot they can do around their zoning policies to look at them and make them more accessible, their planning processes. In Battle Creek specifically, I know that they looked at their policies and found out that every childcare business first had to go through the planning commission, which was on average about $600 for application fees. 100% of them in the last 20 years were approved. They know they need childcare, so why are they making them go through that before they have to go to the commission, the actual city commission? So they removed that requirement from cities so that that was no longer necessary. So they're reducing the barriers that they had put in the way for their our childcare businesses to grow in Battle Creek. All right, so a lot here about support. All of this information that we share with your coalition so that you can work regionally on trying to address how you get the support that you need. And then one last slide, and then we'll be wrapping it up here. All right, actions that you're best positioned to take immediately: exploring, expanding incentives, providing information to municipalities and economic development, becoming a voice, completing the surveys. I hope somebody would say surveys there as one of the first things they could do. So determine which companies in our area are able or willing to provide childcare. I can tell you that another thing that Duncan has done is created a relationship with a childcare provider or business locally that they trust, and they purchased slots on their waiting list for expectant parents at Duncan Aviation. Because one of the things they heard through their survey was that there were families that were like choosing not to even get pregnant because they were so scared of the wait times on these wait lists. So they purchase slots on the wait lists. If it gets to that point where that's the next step and they don't have an expectant parent, it just goes to the next person on the list. So it's a low risk investment, but it gives him something to say to his staff that they've got in place. And he made sure that he had a relationship with his childcare business owner, and it's a place that he would trust. He would send his own children there. So he did the due diligence to really create that relationship. Okay, then I think we have one last slide, and then we're gonna ask if there's any outstanding questions, but this is great work. What support you need? Again, financial, funding, waivers and more flexible implementing on TRISHARE. This is something we've been working on at a state level a lot, is when Tyler and I presented our testimony, the person who was one of the architects of TRISHARE serves on that committee, and Tyler's shaking his head. He was really difficult to deal with. I think he believes he has single-handedly solved the childcare crisis, and we shouldn't complain. And we just had to help him understand, right? Is that a nice way to put it?
I think that's accurate.
Yeah. And so, he said, all I hear are complaints, and I'm somebody who actually rolled my sleeves up and did something about childcare. And so we told him respectfully that it doesn't matter what program you have if you don't have the people doing the work. And that TRISHARE will only work if we have childcare workers. We don't have them, right? So we have to really look at this comprehensively and say, yes, it's a great model, but it's not perfect and we need more. So we are working on that at a state level, trying to get that. So input from stakeholders, continue to engage each other. Bring this up in meetings where it's not being brought up. If you have a group that your economic development group brings together monthly, are you asking, hey, who's doing what about childcare? What are you learning? What can we do together? Like, bring this up in spaces that it normally isn't talked about, because that's how we're gonna normalize this and normalize building our coalition in a way that is much more comprehensive than just, oh, that's an issue that's for somebody else to worry about, because it's all of ours. So I think that rounds it up. There's a lot in here. We will make sure that you get this information back to you, as well as that I don't know who's responsible for being able to share the slides, but I imagine we could share them, since I saw a lot of people taking pictures. So we can get the slides out to folks in case you want to look at them. But before we wrap, any questions that I may be able to answer? I can make something up. Yes.
Mine's not so much a question, but more of an observation and something that we've seen locally. that I didn't see come up as a top issue, and that is the perception of how we value early childhood educators.
Yeah, the mindset.
The mindset. And so I think as a public, that's something that we could build some public will and understanding that early childhood educators are not babysitters.
Yeah.
They are not, the weekend teenage kid that you come make sure your kids don't tear the house down.
Yep.
And I think that even speaking on behalf of those that we listen to that are in this work, that's one of the key things that they mention as a barrier.
Yeah.
Is how they're treated.
So thank you for bringing that up. And I know that isn't explicit on here, but I can tell you that just a few weeks ago, I read an article. It was a longitudinal study of childcare workers in the workforce and people coming in and out of it. And in this, it was written by an economist. In it, they provided the definition of childcare worker from the perspective of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And can I tell you what that definition was? My blood pressure went through the roof. So it's a Sunday night, I'm sitting on the couch with my laptop, my husband's like, what is going on? And I'm like, do you know what they said about childcare workers? So this is how they define childcare workers. Somebody who is responsible for the feeding, bathing, clothing, and playing with children. Period. If we have that definition for a group of professionals, it's not surprising that we're okay paying them $14 an hour. Because that's what we might pay a teenage babysitter on the weekend when we want to go out to a movie. So we have a lot of work to do at the national level to really understand where do these mindsets sit, what's driving them, and how do we change those. But we have the ability regionally to change that for ourselves. We don't have to wait for the feds to do that. What can we do to make sure that these folks are honored and respected and understood for the child development experts that they are? We have two more, yes.
I've noticed that early childhood programs in colleges and universities have gone downhill.
Yes.
They've taken them out or really minimized them because of the pay and the status.
Yeah, this is something that we struggled with partnering with workforce development because they said, we're not going to encourage anybody to go into that field. They don't make enough money. So we even have systemic barriers as to who can work on building the workforce in this sector because of how low the pay is. So we all have a stake in this. I have one and then two, and I know we're time. That's it. Okay, yes.
I was just gonna mention, you had said, paying $14 an hour to somebody to care for children. I'm with Michigan Childcare Centers, and I just would like business owners and CEOs to understand a majority of our workforce is just above minimum wage.
Yeah.
They're not, I'm talking I hire people at $11 an hour.
Yeah.
And our lead teachers are slightly higher than that, depending on what their credentials are. Where teachers who are going to school and getting early childhood education are becoming, hopefully, directors at some point or working in grant-funded programs, like those 4-year-old programs.
Yeah.
So the hard part is finding infant toddler teachers. That's why we have such a shortage. But I just wanted to actually throw the number out there. I have a ton of staff who are literally like $11 an hour, $11.50 an hour.
And we're expecting a lot.
They could be like,
Yeah, that'd be, and who could live on $14 an hour? Let's be honest, right? It's really hard. One last thing, and then I'm getting the whole big crane is taken out to say yes.
My name is Pam and I work for Michigan Works, Region South-E, and one of the potential solutions that we're taking to childcare providers is helping them to put registered apprenticeships in place.
Yeah.
And what that does, it helps to support the provider. It also supports that person who's looking to increase their skills and maybe move from that caregiver role into a lead teacher role.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some innovations that we need to be paying attention to that are somewhat promising, right? So yes, I don't know, you gotta ask him. He's telling me that we're done.
I was just gonna say that locally, if anybody wants more information about early childhood or about the coalition or about what's happening with childcare, preschool, anything early childhood, there is a Great Start Collaborative that represents every county in the state of Michigan. Please reach out to your Great Start Collaborative. If they don't know the answer, they will definitely do what they need to do to find the people that can answer the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Gabby and Ken and all of our speakers. On the way out, we have a water bottle for you. And you're free to stay and talk. We just wanted to honor our closing time of just a few minutes after 2 and give everybody a chance to get on the road if they need to. But this has been a great conversation, a great dialogue, but it's really at the beginning of the process. We have a lot more to do. And those of us in the economic development field, we have a lot to do in terms of addressing this issue as well as our company. So, but again, thank you so much for coming and let's keep the conversation going.